I know this thing is on, and I know that you can hear me. Nursing and healthcare needs advocates and activism. So what are you waiting for? Let's do the damn thing. Hi, and welcome to the Gritty Nurse podcast, an unfiltered discussion related to health and healthcare at the intersection of policy and politics. My name is Amie Archibald-Varley, and I am the Gritty Nurse. So there's a conversation that we all have to have because at one point in time or another, we will reach this destination. It's not a destination that people like to talk about, but we all are going to die one of these days. And, it's a conversation we have to have. I think about it sometimes. I'm kind of like, back burner. No, no, I'm too young. Death has no age. There is no age range that death stops for. So it's important that we have the conversation and that we do not proactively or we don't run away from it. We don't shy away from the conversation. So I'm bringing an expert because I am not an expert. I want to hide. So I'm bringing an expert to talk about death and dying and, maybe reclaiming how we view death. So let me tell you a little bit about Nurse Penny. Penny Smith, also known as Hospice Nurse Penny, is a nationally certified hospice and palliative care nurse. She has decades of experience in end-of-life care and is a social media influencer with millions of followers. Through her social media platforms, including TikTok and Instagram, she aims to normalize death and dying, advocating for hospice education and dispelling misconceptions about end-of-life care. She is also the author of the book, Influencing Death: Reframing Dying for Better Living. Thank you so much, Nurse Penny, for coming on the Gritty Nurse podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited that you're here. And I think that, I watched your socials. I've creeped you a little bit. And of course, we have a lot of things in common. So you're a podcaster as well. You've also written a book, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but you also have hard conversations. So I think that's pretty dope. So without further ado, could you tell me a little bit about yourself and your journey into nursing? Because I think that's one of the things that most my listeners want to know. Like, how did you end up in nursing? And then you could probably talk about how you ended up in hospice nursing.
Well, I actually didn't go to nursing school until I was 40, and that was the result of getting a divorce and needing a career.
I see.
So I knew when I went into nursing school that I wanted to be a hospice nurse. And I always say there's layers to that. I had death anxiety, so I had a morbid curiosity. I had a very rough in my teens where I was addicted to drugs. I went to jail, so I felt like I needed a little bit of redemption. Wanted to do service work, although all nursing is service work. We all nurses serve, right? But I felt like it was this level up. And my mother-in-law had died on hospice about a year before I went to nursing school, and her nurses were just so amazing. I just had so much respect for them, the autonomy that they practiced within, and just the grace that they had. And, I could really tell that it was just sacred work. It just felt like it was going to be the right fit for me. I just thought I can do this. So I actually started off as an LPN because we needed to get the divorce going, and it was faster to go on that track. And I didn't know you could be an LPN and work in hospice. I thought you had to be an RN. So when I first started working, I worked in a family practice clinic for a year. And then I went to a hospital and worked on a med surg transfer unit for a few months. Now, in hospitals, they have this like cyclical layoff that they do. So they were just right in the cycle where they were laying all the LPNs off. So I got
Right.
laid off. But I had started dating my now husband, and they were building a hospice house in his neighborhood. And so
Okay.
when I got laid off, I thought, well, I don't really know if they don't hire LPNs. Maybe I should check into it. So I went there, and they hired me. And from then on, it was pretty much hospice all the way. And I did get my RN, and I did do a little stint in the ER for a few months, which I hated. Don't be a hospice nurse. Don't be a hospice nurse and go work in an ER. It's like culture shock to
Yeah,
the
I was gonna say.
max. It was awful. So yeah, so that's kind of, in a nutshell, that's my journey and what led me, to hospice.
Yeah, no, that's such a beautiful story, and I definitely agree with you. The whole aspect of going from hospice to emergency would be a little bit of a culture shock, like you said. One of the other things that I think is important is life doesn't stop at 40, right? I actually have another podcast called Atypical Podcast where we talk about life's uncertainties. And I think people think that this is how where I'm gonna end up, right? This is the road, this is the path that I'm supposed to take. when we, hit a hurdle or whatever the case may be, we're like, what next? And I'm so glad that you decided to say what next with nursing, because like it's pretty versatile. I mean, there's a lot of different things that you could do, and and you saw kind of the beauty in working with your mom, where you mentioned that you saw how she was cared for by other nurses. So I think it's a admirable thing in terms of serving and giving back. You said you had a difficult past where you engaged in different types of activities, and I think that's a learning journey. And I think that, I hope you never look down on the fact that your life transpired in that way. I think that's just how we learn and how we grow and how we do things differently. And I think it's like I said, I think it's a beautiful journey, and I think it's so rewarding that you're willing to share that with me. So thank you for sharing your story with me.
Yeah.
Another question I get a lot is, what is the difference between hospice and palliative? Because I think, even so, I have listeners that are nurses and I have listeners that are, non-healthcare folks, and maybe they don't know the difference. So what would you say? I mean, this is your world. What's the difference between hospice and palliative care?
I get that question all the time too, by the way. So both are whole person care. Like we are not focused on a disease. We're taking care of the whole person, spiritual, social, and physical health. And so that is one thing that we have in common. Palliative care is for people who have a terminal illness with any life expectancy or a life limiting illness, and they have symptom management needs, and they can continue their treatment. And typically, they are getting palliative care in a clinic or in the hospital. The team is sometimes just a provider and a social worker. With hospice, you have to have a terminal diagnosis with a life expectancy of 6 months or less. You can no
Ah,
longer be seeking treatment for your disease, or there is no treatment available for your disease. And hospice is taking place most of the time in the home or where the person calls home, wherever they live. And you
right.
have a team, you have a hospice nurse, a social worker, a chaplain, an aide. We go to them, and it's very end of life care focused.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's good to outline the differences, because I think that, some people think it's the same thing. And I think it's important that we know that there is that differentiation between the two. And I think that, like, for example, I do have a family member, my father, who currently is going through cancer care, and he's not palliative, but I know it's a conversation that's going to come up. And it's like, it's a conversation that I have to have. So, what would be your advice for, a family member or someone who is now, they're past the, like you said, palliative stage, and they're entering this hospice stage? What is it that you would say to a family member to help cope or kind of see their way through this particular stage?
Well, first of all, I always start off with open-ended questions to find out where people are at with their knowledge about their disease and what's happening with them, because many times people, they're not told or they don't hear what is really happening. And so I've had
Right.
patients that came onto hospice that really didn't understand that they were expected to not only die, but to die within a short period of time. Yeah, it's really important to get to, what do you know about this? Can take it from there. And from there, it is, hospice means a life expectancy of 6 months or less. Do you have fears around that? What are your reservations if somebody doesn't want to go on hospice? That's a biggie, because a lot of people are like, I'm not ready for hospice yet. And people have this misconception that hospice is really for the very last few days of a person's life, or that going on hospice is going to make them die faster. Neither of those
Right.
things are true. And so it's important to be able to address any fears that they have, and just to really ensure them that where hospice is, not focusing on curative anymore, on quantity of life, we are really focused on quality of life. We want to help
Mm,
people to achieve the things that are important to them at the end of their life, to be able to avoid the hospital, to avoid the ER, to avoid having to sit in a waiting room clinic, or
right.
clinic waiting room, to avoid, the things that are going to waste their time when they have such precious little time, to be able to help them to be comfortable and have their symptoms managed and stay in home with their family and friends. That's what we focus on in hospice. So I think it's important to lead them to, not to like what you're not going to get anymore, which is treatment or length
Right.
of time left on this earth, but what you are going to get from going on to hospice, because we
I
don't
really
do
like
anything to
that.
cause people to die faster. Like
It
we don't do anything to hasten death, nor do we do anything to prolong life. We let people
Right.
die a natural death.
Right. And I think the other piece, like, I'm glad that you said that, because I think the other piece is that death is a part of, is a natural process, right? It is something that is an eventuality and is going to happen to all of us. I'm going to circle back to, so you mentioned kind of like what the patient needs. What about what the family needs? Because again, although the patient is going through the dying process, the family is bearing witness. So what do you say to family members?
Well, we're there to support family too, and that's the other thing about hospice. It's patient centered, and it's also for their sphere of support. So their family, their friends, whoever's involved, we are going to be helping them too. Not, of course, with medical care, but with guidance, with education, with support, with counseling should they need that, grief support after the person dies. Like, we're not just taking care of the patient, we're there for everybody in the family, the whole unit. So, that's another thing that's really wonderful about hospice, is that we're going to be there to support. And for me as the nurse, the role is to educate and to normalize what is happening with that person, so that they don't have to be afraid when they see these things unfolding. They can have less fear. If you know what to expect, if you know what you're seeing is normal, then it's going to be less fearful.
I think this kind of really dovetails into this next segment where you talk about it on social media. So, how did you become known as the death influencer?
Well,
I have
so
the viral videos.
so in 2020, we had the lockdown, and I was working days from home, and my husband was working nights, and I couldn't go anywhere anymore. Couldn't go work
Right.
out, couldn't go shopping. I was stuck at home. And I heard about TikTok and found it and started getting sucked into the videos, and at first was doing the little trends on there. Like, I was trying to learn how to shuffle dance, but at that time TikTok was very much a kids app, and I was
Right.
57 years old doing these trends. I was like, this ain't happening. It was just for fun. But
Right.
I told a story about a hospice patient, and it went viral. And I've always been very, very passionate about educating about end of life. And so when it went viral, I thought, oh wow, people want to know about this, especially because COVID, people were
Right.
dying like all over the place, and people all of a sudden were like, whoa, we need to learn more about this death thing that's happening to everybody. So they were, I just kind of, and I had a captive audience because everybody was, in lockdown.
Everyone was stuck. We were all stuck
Yeah.
inside. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
So that's what really got me into it, was just, my passion for educating about end of life care.
Yeah, but I think that's so important, right? I think even more so now that you probably noticed too, there's a huge disinfodemic and the misinformation is so rampant. It's hard to find someone who, one, has experience, two, who knows what they're talking about, and three, and is using the evidence to ground what they do. And I think it's important that if we have influencers that are healthcare providers, that they they are experts, right? And it's important that we have trusted people that we can turn to, especially seeing, again, during the pandemic, that's where we've seen this rise of misinformation. So
Yes.
I'm thankful that you yes, you could do the dancing, but you also provide that valuable information where people might not know where to look. And I think it's, now I'd say that media is even more, that people are turning to, TikTok, Instagram, for these short forms and short bites of information. They're just not going to traditional media anymore. So it's like podcasting, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. And I think that's where most people are getting their information. So you are doing a service. Like, I mean, you're serving in other ways too. So that's pretty dope, right?
Yeah,
So,
well, and speaking of that too, like doing the little bits of information, that was something that I found really worked for a lot of people. So my platform is very eclectic. I do lip syncing with words on the screen, dancing around with words on the screen, all kinds of trends. I do straight talk, answering questions that I get in the comments. I have approached it in many different ways because I know that people learn differently. And so,
right.
some people, death is hard for them. It's a dark topic. And so seeing like a funny little skit is what resonates with them. And I have found that actually works. People learn from these funny little skits, with just a few words on the screen. So that's the beauty of TikTok too, is that it's just so multifaceted. You can appreciate any different learning style and still get what you need from TikTok.
Yeah, no, I think
or
that's really
Instagram or
creative.
YouTube or, yeah.
I think that's really creative that you take various different mediums, different things to do. I don't know if you're gonna catch me dancing, yo. I don't know. I have been looking at the "It Depends" by Chris Brown. I'm kind of like, I should try it because I actually used to dance. But I'm like, I don't know if I'm comfortable yet. But it's important. I think you're right. You're hitting people on different levels, and even if it's a dance, that's still getting someone to your page to learn about death and dying. So I think that's really cool. Is there any? Would you say there are any hot topics right now related to death and dying? I know here in Canada, for example, the author Robert Munch. Yes, no,
No,
maybe.
mm-mm.
Okay, don't worry about it. It's okay. So one of the biggest topics here, and I'll just mention for my Canadian listeners. So Robert Munch is a childhood writer. He wrote many different books. Oh my gosh, I have tons of Robert Munch books. But essentially, he just got diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease and has
Mm.
decided to die by medical assistance in dying. Is there a different name for it in the States?
We call it's either the death with dignity law or medical aid in dying.
Yeah. Here in Canada, it's called MAID. And I know in the US you mentioned that it has a different name, but it's very controversial out here. Is it as controversial out in the US as well?
It is. It is controversial. It is not federally legal. It's only legal in, I think, 11 or 12 states now.
Wow.
We're getting there. It's starting to, move in the direction of more states allowing it. But yeah, it's quite controversial. And ours is even stricter than Canada. Because I know there's at least one province in Canada that allows proxy. Like if you have a disease and you get to a point where you can't speak for yourself, somebody can speak for you. We don't have that. So people with dementia are not able to do medical aid in dying because they have to be within the last 6 months of their life and they have to be decisional.
Yeah.
So they can't do it. Also in Canada, a medical provider administers the medication that ends the person's life. We don't have that here. In the US, they have to self-administer. So
Wow.
that eliminates the ability for people like maybe with ALS who have no control of their body to be able
Yeah.
to take the medication. So it's stricter, definitely more controversial,
Yeah,
definitely.
again, I would say that's another conversation we need to have. Probably that's probably a whole podcast episode on its own. But I think it's important that we have that conversation because I know, for example, there are some concerns from some different lobbyist groups here, particularly around surrounding mental health, where there are concerns about like if a patient who is mentally ill, how do we make sure that if they're choosing MAID, that we're checking all of our boxes to make sure that we're doing the what's in the best interest of the patient and also making sure that we're also doing what's in the best interest of whatever legalities there are around mental illness. And I think that it's an important conversation to have, and I'm glad it's interesting to hear that the pulse is similar in the US, but I think it's a conversation we need to have because I think it is something that should be able to be done.
Yeah, and I don't know, like, so is it now legal in Canada for mental illness? It is not in the US. And I
It
know
is
in
not.
Canada
So
they've been trying for that, right? But they're not getting that, which
yes, it was
that is
delayed.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, like you say, that could be a whole topic because I definitely have feelings about that too,
Mhm.
that are
Yeah.
like, I don't know, maybe not. I can't decide, like
Yeah, I think yeah, I agree with you, Penny, because what happened here in Canada is I believe it was supposed to be legislated that it was going to take place in 2026, early in 2026. And many lobbyist groups were like, hold on, pump the brakes here. We like with mental health, again, if somebody is actively
right.
feeling that they would like to end their life, we have to have conversations about whether that individual has the ability to then be able to choose MAID, right? I think that's
Hmm.
what a lot of the
Hmm.
groups were like, can we have a conversation? So it's been paused here in Canada, in Ontario particular as well. So they're going to revisit that. And I think that I definitely agree that that bears much greater conversation to be had.
Yeah, well, there has to be mental health support in place for that, which we don't have in the US at all. It's being cut more all the time. But to be able to have, this option for people, you have to ensure that you have done everything possible to make sure that their mental illness truly is intractable and that
Right.
nothing has worked for them. But, my cousin died by I have two cousins that died by suicide. One was 25 years old and she jumped off a bridge. And the other one, and by the way, this is a fun fact for you. I didn't realize you were in Canada until I start hearing you you talking and I hear your accent. So I consider myself half Canadian because my mother was born and raised in Fanistella, Manitoba.
Wild.
Yeah, she is now an American citizen. She became an American after I was born. So I've been thinking about coming over there. But I have a cousin in Canada who was 13 years old who also died by suicide. And he actually, they did you guys have a show up there, that a news show that was around, I think it was probably back in the 2000s. It was like what we call 2020 here. It's like a news
So
show.
probably W5, yeah. Like
And
an
they did a
investigative kind of.
story. Yeah, yeah. And they did a
Wow.
story about him.
My
He had
goodness.
been bullied in school. He was being bullied in school and he died by suicide with a
My God.
gunshot. Yeah,
I'm so sorry to
13,
hear that.
13 years old. Yeah, I had never met him. So, I didn't know him, but still it's impactful when you have two family members that die by
That's
suicide.
yeah, that I would say, yeah.
But so there you go. There's a situation where, like, if you have this thing available, not that a 13-year-old would have qualified for it, but you've got to have more mental health care in place to be able to address these issues before then saying, okay, we know that this isn't going to be fixed and we're going to let you do this.
Yeah, 100%. Again, we didn't even touch pediatrics. That's like that would be again like a whole other conversation, right? And yes,
Hmm.
if you ever need asylum,
I'm,
we're
I'm
here.
not,
You know
I'm
what?
not kidding.
I am happy to drain all of the US of their, healthcare talent. Feel free to come
So,
here. It's okay.
so
We will take you.
where are you in Canada? What
I'm in the
province?
GTA, so the Greater Toronto area. So like I'm in
Okay.
Ontario.
Okay.
Yeah,
So I live in Washington State on a mountain in a cabin off the grid, and I'm not kidding. I have been thinking about seeing if I can get my nursing license in Canada through reciprocity and going up there and working in Canada. And because I have all of my mom's documentation from, her birth certificate to when she was naturalized in the US, I believe I can get Canadian residency, and I can
I
still
believe
come
you
over
can too.
here and live in my cabin in the mountains and go to work and be a Canadian resident.
Absolutely. You just like just like, all right, off I go. Yeah, no. I mean, absolutely. And again, if you ever need help and support, I know some great people here, so we can definitely help facilitate that. Again, like I said, we're happy to brain drain the US of all your scientific and healthcare talent. We'll take it.
Well, we're not being
So
utilized here
let's talk.
anymore, so.
Yeah, again, that's another another right. I do want to touch on some other great work that you've done. So you have written a book. You're an author like me, which is amazing. Tell us a little bit about your book, Influencing Death: Reframing Dying for Better Living.
So it's a memoir, but it's an educational memoir. It's a teaching memoir. So again, I had this journey to become a hospice nurse that a lot of people are interested in. And I also feel like that journey lends to why I am the nurse that I am and how I'm able to do this work, which lots of people think is really difficult to do. But it's definitely got stories of my patients woven in there with a lot of education, about grief, about the dying process, about my own journey with my dad and my dad's death. So it's just got a little bit of everything. It's got dark humor in it. It's entertaining, it's inspirational, and it's educational.
Where can people find your book?
So in Canada, you can get it on Amazon Canada, but I think it's more expensive than if you get it at Indigo. So Indigo
Okay.
carries it.
Okay. No, I think we need to continue to have these conversations, and I think seeing more people writing about it and talking about it, and it's another medium. There are lots of people that are like, I can't do social media. I'm still a bookworm. So then again, you've hit like all the different mediums. So definitely I think that'll be a great sharing tool for people to learn a little bit more about your book. So I did read a little bit about your book, and one of the questions I have for you, particularly, is about your take on the woo woo stuff. Tell me a little bit about that.
The woo-woo stuff. Yeah,
The
well,
woo woo stuff.
there's some things that happen during the dying process that there's no scientific explanation for, and which is fine
Right.
because I think a little bit of mystery is good. Yeah. But that would be deathbed visioning, where people see their deceased loved ones or even pets at the end of life. It's very common. It's called deathbed visioning, but that's kind of a misnomer because they can actually start having these visions weeks before their death. and
Right.
they can tell you about it, and they're not drugged up and they're not confused, and they can say, like my wife is in the corner of the room over there. They also do a lot of things with their hands, like reaching in the air and picking at their clothes and things like pretending to smoke if they were smokers. Or I've had patients that tied flies, like fisherman flies,
Really? Wow.
and yeah, I'd be like, what? I'd ask the family,
What is going on with
what do
that?
you think he's doing? Oh, he's a fisherman. He's tying flies, needle point. So I really think they're doing life review.
Right.
They seem to be during this transition period before they're kind of like in between the living and the dying. They go through transition, and it seems like they're here and then they're somewhere else. Like the
Right.
veil is lifting. That's just another, like we don't know what they're doing. It's very, very woo woo.
I think that's okay. You're right. I remember when my grandfather was dying, that he actually talked. So he died in a hospital, but he was in a ward. So there were four other patients in the room, and he was kind of like the last guy to go. But we got to know everybody there. And I remember him telling me about like another patient that had passed on. He's like, oh, you got to tell him he's got to leave my room. He needs to go back to his bed. And I was like, oh my gosh, grandpa, like he died a couple weeks ago. He's like, no, he was just here. And I'm like, oh my God.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're right. Like I think that there are things that are unexplained, and you're right. A little bit of mystery never hurt anybody. And I think it's just one of those things that we'll never know. We'll never know until we're at that stage ourselves, right?
And I look forward to that. I think it's a beautiful part of the dying process, and dying can be a beautiful experience. It doesn't have to be a scary, awful experience. It can be beautiful and sacred. And so I always think like I'm not in any hurry to die. People will ask me,
Right.
like, you afraid to die? I'm not afraid to die anymore. I'm not. I don't have death anxiety anymore. I'm not looking forward to it. I want to live a long
Right.
life. But I do think when I'm dying, if I get to have that natural death and go through that dying process, if I don't die traumatically in an accident, then I look forward to seeing the people who I love who died before me, real or not.
Right.
And it's very real to the people who are experiencing that. And I actually do believe it's real,
Yeah, no,
because if you see it happening, like like you did, right, with
yep.
your grandfather, right?
It's really undeniable, really.
It's undeniable that they absolutely see someone in the room with them. It's convincing. Like you think, okay, there must be something wrong with me because I can't see them, you
Right.
know.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it is a beautiful thing for them, and I think it'll be a beautiful process for us when we get there. Again, I like you said, I am not looking, I'm not knocking on its door. I'm not trying to conjure anything up. But when that time comes, that hopefully I can, feel a sense of peace as well. And again, I have my work to do. I'm not lying. I still have a will to write, which is like this painful thing. I'm just like, okay, I got to get it done. I got the paperwork. I'm gonna get it done. And with more conversations with you and other folks, I'm sure that I will get to doing that, and other people will feel maybe more comfortable to say, "Hey, I can do this too," and I can have more conversations about death and dying. But before we go, is there anything that we have not touched on that you would like to add to the conversation?
I just always like to close by saying that the best way to ensure that you will have a good death experience is to get in the conversation, to talk about it, to learn about it, to not be afraid to approach it. If somebody that you love or that you know is dying, don't be afraid to have conversations with them about that, because that is the only way that you are able to really truly say goodbye. And when people are dying, there's often a lot of emphasis on telling them that it's okay or that you'll be okay. But what people mostly want to know is that their life had meaning and purpose. So being able to acknowledge that death is going to happen allows for that conversation.
Wow, that's really powerful. And I'll be honest, I never even thought about it that way in terms of, allowing them to review and to say that, here is how you lived well and how you lived, or whatever the conversation might be. I think that's a really powerful thing to say. And I think a lot of people will take some good information away from this conversation. So thank you so much, Nurse Penny, for coming on the Green Nurse podcast. We have to talk about where people can find you. Where can people find you?
So I have a website, hospicenursepenny.com, and there are a lot of resources on there for people that want to know more about hospice in the US, more about death and dying. I have tips for hospice nurses on there. And also I am on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook at Hospice Nurse Penny.
And they can find your podcast where?
So my podcast is Death Happens, an Insider's Guide to Dying. It's on Spotify, Apple, YouTube. We have done 2 seasons, but we're actually on a little brief pause right now because my partner and I are actually writing a book. So we
That's
took a break
amazing.
from podcasting, but there's still 2 seasons out there that are very good.
All right. Thank you again for coming on the Green Nurse podcast.
Thank
And I'm sure we'll
you.
have more conversations. And yes, we need to be open about talking about death and dying. So thank you for that, Nurse Penny.
Thank you. Thank you.
Looking for a great gift for a nurse or someone who needs to learn about nursing? Check out my national best-selling book, The Wisdom of Nurses, Stories of Grit from the Bedside. Thank you so much for listening to The Gritty Nurse with Amie Archibald-Varley. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or any other podcast platform, please hit the subscribe button so you'll never miss out on any awesome episodes from The Gritty Nurse. Thank you so much and stay tuned until next time. Stay gritty.